fundamental understanding and method, which influences various worldviews. The fundamental concept behind this understanding and method is fighting those who are not one of us. The average people on the street may not know what Darwinism means. They may not know what natural selection means or mutation means. However, they agree with a view whose philosophical basis rests on Darwinism. So if Darwinism is taken away, no philosophy of conflict remains. Slide, please. What about fascism? The founder of fascism, Adolf Hitler and Alfred Rosenberg, they got the ideas from Darwin's racist ideas and applied into the bloody fascism and Nazi ideologies. Slide, please. Darwin himself, he was a racist. That was the reason why the title of his book was The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. According to Darwin, the favored races were white European man. He stated that white European man is more evolved than animals, and there are lower animals, all the Arabs, blacks, and Aborigines, all other races which are close to monkeys. And he stated also, at some future period, this is from the Descent of Man, at some future period, not very distant as measured by centuries, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races throughout the world. So basically he said, lower, higher races, more evolved animals, they will exterminate all the lower races. And these ideas were taken by Adolf Hitler and Alfred Rosenberg and applied into the societies and fascism and bloody Nazi ideology. Next slide, please. Adolf Hitler, he said, take away the Nordic Germans and nothing remains but the dance of apes. He used Darwinism as the so-called scientific justification of his perverted ideas. In his book, Mein Kampf means my struggle, my fight, my struggle. He was inspired from the struggle for survival concept of Darwin and applied this idea as a struggle between races into the fascism and Nazism. And that caused 55 million lives in Europe at this time, the time of the Second World War. So basically, if Darwinism is taken away, no philosophy of conflict remains. Because of these Darwinist ideas, 350 million people were slaughtered in the 20th century. This is the bloodiest century of the entire human history. Because of these ideas were applied into the communism, fascism, capitalism, anarchism, and the terrorism. Now, people go into the scientific evidences which refute Darwinism. Douglas Futuma is a very prominent Darwinist from the United States, from State University of New York. Futuma gives us an important criteria to falsify Darwinism. He said, he's a very famous Darwinist, organisms either appeared on the earth fully developed or they did not. If they did not, they must have developed from pre-existing species by some process of modification. If they did appear in a fully developed state, they must indeed have been created by some omnipotent intelligence. I want to attract your attention to this underlined part. He says, if you look at the life on earth, and if you see that the living beings appear all of a sudden with their perfect and complete forms, then we have to admit that they are being created by Allah. Next slide, please. Now, first of all, the evolutionists have to answer three questions. The first question is, how did life originate on Earth? The second question is, what are the mechanisms of evolution? And the third question is, if all the species on Earth are the result of evolution, then there must be a vast amount of fossil evidence of evolution. Are there any such fossils? Now, we will evaluate these questions one by one. Slide, please. Question number one, how did the first living cell form? Slide, please. Now you see, this is one of the technologically best and largest computers in the world. Of course, a computer like this has one of the largest capacities. So if you check, slide please, the DNA molecule, you know, all the living cells have DNA molecules. The amount of information is much, much larger than that. Because, for example, in 1 gram, which is calculated by Led Adelman from University of Southern California, the amount of information in 1 gram DNA molecule is that much. It's about 200 trillion books. 200 trillion books in 1 gram DNA molecule, the amount of information. This is much larger, 10,000 times larger than the entire number of the books written in the entire human history. There is no way that DNA could be a product of coincidences. Slide, please. You see a metropolis over here, a large city. Of course, metropolis cities such as London, New York, Paris, they have high-tech factories, laboratories, refineries, pipelines, security systems, transport systems, or gates to enter and exit the city. Slide please, if you check a single cell, which is 100 millimeter in size, which is much more complex than the largest city of the world, because a cell like this has a huge data bank. It has nuclear power stations, mitochondria, it has high-tech factories, it has high-tech laboratories, refineries, transport systems, security systems, gates to enter and exit the city. Basically, a cell which is 100 millimeter in size is much more complex than the largest city of the world. For example, in human cells, there are estimated 10 billion proteins every single moment. And every second, 2,000 proteins are being produced. Each human cell. So, if any one of these organelles fails to function or is missing, the cell cannot remain alive. The cell does not have the opportunity to wait for unconscious mechanisms such as mutation or natural selection to permit it to develop. Therefore, the first cell on Earth was necessarily a complete cell possessing all these required functions and organelles. And this definitely means this cell had to be created. And if you check the fossil evidence, slide please. This is in fact, fossil evidence confirms this fact. The first cell on Earth appears all of a sudden with all these components intact as a living cell, and this confirms the fact this cell is created by Allah. This is a fossil from Australia. 3.5 billion years old bacteria fossil you see over here. This is a bacteria from today. It's called Leptoningia bacterium. You see exactly the same. The first cell on Earth appears all of a sudden, a live cell with all these components intact. So that confirms the fact it is created. For example, it was published in the Nature magazine. There are cyanobacteria fossils, 3.87 million years old, appear all of a sudden. There are fossil evidence of this from Australia. And they can do photosynthesis. This is an extremely complex chemical reactions. Slide please. There is a law in the, almost a law in the biology. It's called biogenesis. This is the #1 biology textbook of the world. It's called Textbook of Biology, which is written by Neil Campbell and Rees. Campbell and Rees biology textbook. In this book, which is defending Darwinism, in this book Neil Campbell says, as far as we know, all life today arises only by the reproduction of pre-existing life. This life from life principle is called biogenesis. So life is only generated from life. Each living cell is formed by the replication of another cell. Therefore, the first life on Earth must have originated from other life. And that is Allah's reflection epithet of high. Epithet means the owner of life. Life can only start, continue, and end by His will. Slide please. There are protein molecules in the living creatures. There are basic structures of the living cells. There are trillions of different protein molecules in the millions of species. For example, it is estimated in the human bodies there are more than 100,000 different protein molecules. So protein molecules, they have a very specific design and function. For example, they make our muscles. They work as enzymes. They work as hormones. They have a very specific design and function. There are 3 basic conditions for the formation of a useful protein. The first one is that all the amino acids in the protein chain are of the right type and in the right sequence. Protein molecules are amino acid chains. So there are 20 different amino acids for each spot in the living beings. 20 different amino acids are used. So it must be right sequence in order for a protein molecule to function.